Just a couple of days after the first real snow of the season, heavy rain is hitting Massachusetts, and meteorologists are warning of flooding across the state. Meteorologist Dave Tolares of WXRisk.com joins me now on what we can expect from this storm and the rest of the season. David, thank you so much for diving in on this. What is ahead for Massachusetts? There's a lot of talk about flooding.
Well, there is. And part of the problem is that over the last 30 days, rainfall amounts have run about 150 to 250% above normal across eastern Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and then down into New York and New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania. Western Massachusetts, western New Hampshire, Vermont, it hasn't been quite that wet, but generally 5 to 7 or 8 inches above normal in the last 30 days. So the ground levels are really saturated. So they can't handle any more precipitation. Then we had our first snow of the season. Now that snow is going to melt because of the oncoming southerly winds tonight into tomorrow morning. We're going to get the heavy rain of 1 to 3 inches, some areas as much as 4 inches. So that's going to make the snow melt and turn to water even faster than it normally would. And all that has no place to go because the ground conditions are saturated. So that is going to be a big problem here. There will be some strong winds up to 50 miles an hour on the coast, especially the South Massachusetts coast, not so much eastern Massachusetts, Boston Harbor, but, from Cape Cod all the way down to New York City, Long Island, Connecticut, we're going to get those strong south winds up to 50 miles an hour, or even higher gusts than that. But for eastern Massachusetts, that's not going to be that much of a problem. It'll be a windy and stormy night, but it's mostly going to be the rain and the flooding potential.
So let's break down that flooding piece of it. I mean, what you described for more broadly New England, 150 to 250% above normal. You said that didn't include Massachusetts necessarily, but yeah.
Yeah, it's western Massachusetts. They were at 150% above normal. The really saturated stuff has been eastern Massachusetts and Boston, southeast New Hampshire, okay, and down into Rhode Island and Connecticut. So there is some difference depending on the geography. But, this is a big rain for everybody. And even in the western areas where it hasn't been quite that wet, there's going to be localized flooding.
So what's causing this? What should people know?
Well, this is a massive storm which has dropped a blizzard and heavy snow conditions throughout the Midwest. Iowa, heavy snow, Minnesota, northern Illinois, Chicago, eastern Nebraska, Kansas, that sort of stuff. They had blizzard warnings out there and winter storm warnings. So that storm is going across the Midwest into the Great Lakes. And it's going to drive warm air ahead of it into up the East Coast. So the heavy rains are going from Georgia all the way to Maine. It's everybody on the East Coast is getting it. Now, some areas in the Mid-Atlantic are having very, very strong winds with this, which, again, we're not going to see that much in the Boston area. But the wind is a problem and the rain is a problem. And the Mid-Atlantic is a little different. For example, if you go down past New York City, down towards Washington and Virginia, they've actually been in a drought this summer, so they're not quite as saturated. But this rain, and then, of course, there's another storm coming on Friday to Saturday, which is going to bring almost the exact same conditions.
So more flooding after the flooding is what you're saying?
Yes, that's a real problem.
So
yeah,
can you remind people what they should be doing in the immediate term? How do they prepare for this?
Oh, well, if you've experienced any flooding in your area, your home, the way you go to work, the driving, the parking lots, your transportation areas, where you've seen any sort of flooding over the past 2 or 3 weeks because of the rains and the snows, that's only going to get worse. So areas which are prone to flooding are going to get more flooding. But now we're reaching a point where areas which normally don't see, just damp grounds are going to be more flooded. Now, that may just be your front yard. It may just become a pile of mud for the next week or so. But some areas, if you have leaves and gutters, you have to check them because a lot of people don't. And normally, over time, the built-up leaves kind of breaks down and it, dissipates and it's not a problem. But with this amount of rain and the snow we've had, you have to keep all the gutters, all the areas around your drains have to be completely clear in order to get rid of the water because any buildup at all, the ground can't handle it. And if your basements flood, that's going to be a problem, okay? And with the second event coming up Friday night and Saturday, that's not going to change. So you've got several days to watch out for, not just this event into tomorrow morning.
So those are all good reminders, and check your sump pumps and do all those things.
Yes. Yeah.
Why is this happening? Is this about El Nino? Is this climate change? Is it both? What's this about?
Well, this is partially El Nino. to a large degree. The last 3 winters, as you know, last winter we had very little snow in Boston and New England. And it wasn't just Boston and New England. There was no snow in New York. New York City has gone 700 days without an inch of snow. That's pretty amazing. That's over 2 years. So that was also down into Philly and into, Ohio and Indiana and Kentucky, or even, you had to go all the way into the Dakotas and the Rockies. If you remember last year, they had huge snows in the Sierras. We also had pictures of that in the Cascades, California, the Bitterroots, the Rockies. They've had that 2 years in a row. That was because of La Nina. La Nina favors the western United States and dry and mild for the eastern U.S. So that was the last 2 years. Now we've moved to El Nino, but this is a very strong El Nino. So what it's doing is it's driving all the storms from California right across into the Midwest and then eventually into New England.
And David, can you remind people of this El Nino effect? Can you explain
Sure.
in basic terms what this does?
All right. Well, El Nino or La Nina referred to a type of ocean water temperatures which exist along the equatorial Pacific, off the coast of Peru, along the equator, out towards the Philippines, that whole area towards the international date line. And we measure that by looking at different sectors. That region is divided up in several sectors. And when the water temperatures there are colder than normal, that's called La Nina. And when they're warmer than normal, it's called El Nino. And they have different impacts on the climate depending on what you're talking about. For example, La Nina favors a very active hurricane season. El Ninos generally suppress hurricane seasons. El Ninos, as long as they're not too strong, often bring about stormy winters in the eastern U.S.
So that's what we're seeing then here?
Yes. Yes. Now, we got off to a mild start in December, but again, that's typical. When you have an El Nino winter, December is almost always mild in the eastern United States.
So what piece of this
But that changes in January, February, March. It turns totally different.
So what piece of this is climate change, can we say? Or can we?
Some of it is, because what's happening is the atmosphere is warmer. You can see the temperatures, your normal overnight low temperatures during the summer, the winter, the mean temperatures continue to go up at a very steady pace. And it's obviously operating with it. For example, 2023 was the warmest year on record. Now, part of that was because we had La Nina and El Nino, which brought extra energy to the atmosphere and climate change. So if we were to take out El Nino, 2023 probably would not have been the warmest year on record. Okay, if we took out the climate change and had El Nino, it would not be the warmest year on record. But both things together, you get the warmest year on record.
Right, right. And so what can you tell us also about the astronomical tide at this point for Massachusetts? I think that we're also having a little bit of, in terms of flooding, we're going to have sort of bad timing there as well in this state.
Yeah. We reached the full tide of moon cycle, I think, on Wednesday or Thursday. So we're not quite at the full cycle right now. But the storm on Friday to Saturday, that's going to be at a full moon cycle. So that storm is probably going to have higher tides than this one. So that is something to keep in mind. But so that's going to affect mostly the south shore of New England, because you're getting those strong south winds driving the water up into Long Island and Connecticut and southern Massachusetts. So to impact Boston and Boston Harbor and southeast New Hampshire, you want to get more of an easterly wind. And both this storm and the one on Friday night to Saturday are not going to give us east winds. They're mostly going to give us south winds.
Okay, so we have one thing that may be going for us.
One break. There you go.
One little note. Do you think that we generally, certainly in Massachusetts, have to just get used to more flooding? I mean, there are parts of the world, which I could name, whether it's India or Bangkok or wherever you go, they are used to this. It is a constant phenomenon. They will just walk through the flooding. For us, it still seems like a special major event. Do you think that this is just a feature that we are going to have to get used to every year?
Yes, because that's what the change in climate does. Now, I know there are people out there who argue against the change in climate, but I just tell people it doesn't make a difference what you want to attribute it to. At this point, it's a fact, okay? And we can see the changes happening, so it is a fact. We can argue about what it causes or how much it is or isn't being caused by humans or man-made. That's really irrelevant. If you have a house on the beach and it gets destroyed by a hurricane, does it make a difference why the hurricane was stronger than usual? No, it doesn't. Okay, if your house is being flooded, does it make a difference what's causing the extra moisture in the atmosphere? It doesn't.
Right, right. We're going to have to leave it there. David Toleris. I want to get it right. David Toleris of WXRisk.com. Your business, you actually consult for businesses worried about the weather, and there must be a lot of them out there. Thank you very much for your time.
You bet. Anytime.